I'm so delighted you're here today, Emilio. It's so good to be with you. Um, and, just the spirit you've enlivened in me as I've read some of your work, your dissertation, which talks about this incredible accompaniment you've done of this great group in Chiapas, Mexico. And I'm so glad to have you here with us today. Your presence in Haiti, our minds and hearts have been with the folks you work with down there in recent time, and in particular, just the way you have helped me see the spirit of the economy of Francesco alive in so many of the relationships you're in with um, solidarity economy entrepreneurs and Jesuits, indigenous communities, the land, ecology. How do we imagine a new kind of economic anthropology that helps us understand our role in things? And I've learned so much from your writing about um, conjoint identity, and disjoint identity, and Gudeman, and some frameworks that we can draw on from economic thinkers that help us understand ourselves as actors. And as investors, so many of the Livable Future Investing Workshop cohort has been trying to understand when our traditional mindset is, as a finance and business professional, to, I think, use that market identity, use that disjoint identity. But our faith and our community and our belief in the body of Christ and our own presence there helps us solidify that conjoint identity. So your witness has helped me realize we can bring those two parts of ourselves and imagine solidarity economy where all of us is this greater reciprocity with the earth and generations to come. So with that as an overview, go ahead and take us through your slides here and tell us a little about yourself and your own journey.
Thanks, Felipe. It's great to be in this conversation with you and with other people who are also looking for a reason to hope, as I like to say, looking for reasons to hope for livable futures, right? And specifically what that means, I think, has been evolving. For Jesuits in Latin America, we have a strong tradition of being close to the people, of having a very holistic vision about what our mission is, including the ecology, including things like food systems, including, of course, spirituality. And a lot of those things have made us confront injustices. And I think for a long time, we were really centered on denouncing injustices, which is important, and we need to keep doing that. But more and more, I think we're experiencing a shift in the last few decades where we're also thinking about how do we build something better, sort of what's the alternative, and how do we create something better. And in a lot of parts of Latin America, that has led Jesuits to start accompanying sort of alternative economic initiatives, alternative productive initiatives, everything from microfinance for housing to alternative tourism, to coffee shops, cheese factories, sort of you name it. These different Jesuit initiatives kind of started popping up all over Latin America to say, how do we help people find life in abundance, right? Which includes economic growth, if you will, or at least, out of poverty, but also the social dimension, also the ecological dimension, and not treating those as trade-offs, but rather, how do we find the virtuous circles between those three dimensions? So as this kind of started emerging, eventually the Jesuits realized that this was going on in different places. And a little over 10 years ago, we created this network, the Comparte Network. As you know, comparte comes from the word to share in Spanish. So it's for a more human and more sustainable economy, right? Basically, cooperatives, social solidarity economy, but also very much centering indigenous and other marginalized cultures, and very much centering care for the earth, for the planet. We're in 11 countries. So I belong to this network as a researcher. I did my doctoral thesis on one of the initiatives and got to know them through there. And I am a Jesuit, as I think you mentioned. So we're in 11 different countries in Latin America. We're also in Spain, in the Basque country of Spain in the north, which, as you know, is connected to Mondragon, and we'll come back to that. So there's 16 different basically Jesuit NGOs or different types of Jesuit works that accompany 400 and some producer organizations, and those producer organizations have just over 500, so over 560 actual productive initiatives, some type of business initiative. And this is just over 50,000 people, half are women. It's very much a multi-stakeholder model. So you have the nonprofits, you have the cooperatives, which are very often agriculturally rooted. Some of them are more urban. But then you have universities, you have foundations, you have kind of all types of institutions working together to make these businesses and make this alternative model of economy kind of viable and make it take root. So here's a kind of a quick overview with the map of the 11 countries in Latin America. And in the corner there, you can see some of the other networks and things. For example, in the Amazon region, we work transnationally around the Amazon as a whole in those various countries, and also with the Fe Alegría network, which is present in different countries. And through a Jesuit NGO in Bilbao in Spain, we're also connected kind of to what's happening in Europe around these different economies. And there you see we're in everything from food production to credit and those sorts of things. But then in Ecuador, you'll find housing, you'll find shoes, you find a little bit of everything. In Peru, they've got a really beautiful sustainable tourism, alternative tourism business model. And you've got things like coffee and cocoa. The group that I wrote my dissertation on and kind of got engaged through is in Chiapas, in the south of Mexico, the Misión de Bachajón, and their kind of large cooperative Yomol Atel, which is a great example of what the Comparte Network is doing. So they have done forward vertical integration with the coffee value chain. So they started, it's a cooperative of coffee producers, but they roast their own coffee and they have their own chain of coffee shops with their own brand, which is where the governance of that value chain is, where the money is. Then they're also getting into other value chains like honey, like different soaps and things based on local biodiversity. But then they have their own microfinance bank. And this is all connected to a model of social organization, which is connected to the church, which is connected to care for the earth, for the land, and for food sovereignty. So it's all really, really holistic. You know, when Pope Francis talks about integral ecology, and they're just trying to see how can we make this viable economically in a way that is coherent with these values and doesn't treat them as a trade-off.
And it's something that I was so struck by, recognizing the commodity nature of coffee in Latin America and throughout the globe, and the volatility in the coffee prices, and the way that people will come and buy, your kilos of coffee as you produce them. And some harvest seasons you might get a better price and a much different price depending on where the market is. And so some of that analysis through the Jesuits' accompaniment in this part of Chiapas, especially with the deacons and trying to preserve their own kind of cultural heritage and vision for the future, but also have a sustainable income stream from the coffee. But yet they didn't have the awareness that, how they could kind of do the shade grown, the premium kind of coffee products that they could, and so command a better market. So that's what been built here over the past decade with this enterprise. And could you just give us a little sense of that enterprise, because you've got vertical integration out with the coffee shops here in Mexico City and others, and I've been buying the past few months. Can you tell me a little about kind of just the size of the enterprise there?
Yeah, I mean, size-wise, well, just before the pandemic, everything has kind of changed now with the pandemic, but they've been quite resilient, which is the good news. And they were also resilient before with the coffee rust, which was a disease that affected most of their production. So they've proven resilient. But I can give you the numbers up until right before the pandemic. Their revenues were about $2 million a year, and their profits were in the hundreds of thousands a year. And those profits are entirely reinvested through their own microfinance bank, which gives both productive loans and sort of emergency loans for health and things like that to the people in the cooperative and in the community. Fantastic. You mentioned economic anthropology, And you mentioned coffee as a commodity. And the way I like to summarize what they've been doing is sort of a double decommodification of their economy. So on the one hand, they've decommodified coffee, whereas when economists talk about a commodity, usually we talk about a very basic good like green coffee before it's roasted, before it's served as a cappuccino, or before it's branded. And so by conquering the full value of that value chain, they've gone from selling a basic commodity to selling a more finished product, right? And in that sense, they've decommodified, right, through forward vertical integration on the value chain. But they've also decommodified in an opposite way, which is by saying some things are not for sale. Some things are not commodities, they're not merchandise, right? And so their land, their food, their culture, their natural resources, they've withdrawn from the market and they protect them from the market. And they say those things are our base in Goodman's terms. Those things we want to protect because they're what's essential to our reproduction as a people and as a planet. And so what's interesting is the way that they conjugate both of those strategies, and they make them work together as a creative tension between these two very different ways of looking at the economy. So anyway, that's you can read the thesis if you want more.
Yes, no, thank you, Emilio. So
And so they're connected to this network, which is really, it was easy to do research with them because I mean, it was fascinating too, because they're so sophisticated and they're so systematic, and they sit down and write what they're trying to do. So over the past 10 years, the first thing they did is they sat down and said, okay, what are we aiming for? What's our vision, right? And then of course, it's pretty much what you'd expect, but they made it explicit, the person at the center of the economy, with gender equity, with care for the planet, with participation, subsidiarity, these sorts of things. And then they said, okay, in order to get that, what sort of capabilities do we need? And what's our strategy for being able to do that? And then what's our method to do this in a way that's going to lead us to greater scale, right? And then they have a whole team of researchers where I'm just one among many people who've been writing theses and different professors as well, and student projects on pretty much every aspect of what they're doing to help them. They ask researchers to help them to reflect together with them and to deepen their vision of what they're doing, as well as very practical things like, we have people from business schools coming down. What's the most efficient way to put the honey in boxes in order for, cost effective with FedEx, things like that. I mean, very, very concrete things as well as very theoretical things. In a couple of weeks, we're having an online forum with the Miami Institute of Social Sciences and with the Jesuit University in Mexico City, together with Comparte, about social solidarity economy in Latin America. So we're also doing networking and kind of, you could say, advocacy or impact, just trying to reach a wider audience with this vision, and very, very systematic planning and things like that. So they've been just very systematic, very solid. And some of these businesses, what I found really exciting a couple of years ago, developed business plans by literally sending, I think it was either 2 or 4 people from each of the initiatives in the network went to the Basque country of Spain, where they have these strong relationships with Mondragon, and these kind of veterans among the founders of the Mondragon, who are now kind of semi-retired, spent a few months one-on-one with these teams from each of the member countries and help them to develop really solid business plans for their cooperatives or their social businesses in Latin America. And that's published as well as a book. So they're at different stages of development, different styles, different models. But overall, I mean, they're really maturing. And so more and more, they're asking the question about finance. Most of them started off very grassroots, sort of a mutual aid model, what we call popular economy in Latin America, with different types of savings and rotating funds, but at a very kind of a grassroots level. Eventually, they developed the capabilities through these Jesuit nonprofits to get pretty decent sized grants from foundations, everything from Ford Foundation or some of the corporate social responsibility in Europe. They get some pretty good foundations, grants. And then as their businesses really start becoming more autonomous and even profitable, they've convinced some friends to, this is very primary relationship, very trust-based for now, but to invest in them and to say, no, we don't want a donation, we want an investment and we'll pay you back, right? Of course, on very friendly terms, kind of slow and not a huge interest rate and that sort of thing. But as an exercise in entering this logic, and you can see that they've down there on those images, you can see that they've been reflecting from their own experience. That Aurora is a Jesuit magazine that's published during the pandemic, and the Comparte Network had one of the issues where they had several articles thinking about finance based on their experience. And then they also had a consultant specialized in solidarity economy who spoke at their last assembly this past June about finance strategies for their different organizations and different models, different strategies, different sources potentially for finance. So this is something they've been thinking about. They've been asking people to help them research. And some of them really are ready to kind of upgrade into what you could say more professional or larger scale private investment. Of course, ideally always in a way that's coherent with their sort of Laudato Si values, their Francesco economy values, and their style of trying to do this in a way that's inclusive and sustainable. And so the new thing that's just being launched right now is an accelerator program in collaboration with the Jesuit University in Mexico City, La Universidad Iberoamericana, where there's a research center dedicated to social solidarity economy. And that's networked not only with the Comparte Network, but also with lots and lots of other cooperatives and sort of grassroots social businesses, producer associations throughout Mexico and throughout Latin America. So they're launching this accelerator program, which is a sort of very serious, the model through the university is a diploma course, so it's got modules and it's got, a number of credit hours and those things. It's online, but with tutors or mentors in each of the participating countries so that they understand the context, they understand the local political economy, and they can do site visits. So it's sort of a hybrid model that's organized from Mexico, but really decentralized at the same time and kind of localized at the same time, which I think is important when you're dealing with these alternative economies, especially in places where we're working with marginalized groups, either peripheral urban neighborhoods or indigenous communities, where you can't just take for granted, sort of the way things are set up. So it's people who really understand the local context. And the idea is that by the end of the course or the program, the participants will be able to pitch to those who are more mature, who are more ready, to actual investors. Others may be more to something like a grant, from a foundation or whatever, but that they'll have a project that they're able to propose. And so this is just going to be the first edition, but hopefully of many. Hopefully this will become a permanent thing to help all these kind of alternative, productive initiatives throughout Latin America to kind of upgrade and move into something a little bit more consolidated, so that, as we say, so that they can one day stop being alternative and be the new normal, right? So kind of the next step, the next goal is in conjunction with this accelerator program to develop an investment fund, to have maybe somewhere around $10 million total that can be allocated throughout these different participating cooperatives and social businesses. Always with the sort of Laudato Si economy of Francesco style and values, throughout both the participating cooperatives, but ideally also the investors themselves would be aligned with those values, so that our goal is not only to make money or to even to just help these people in Latin America live better, but really to develop relationships and really to bring people together around shared values. And what more shared value than a livable future for humanity, right? So, so that's kind of the big picture of what the Red Comparte is about and what we're doing. And well, I'm excited about it, so I'm glad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
No,
for
Emilio, it's been so fun, and you've been
letting me
such
share.
a treasured partner for me in helping me understand the landscape with your research, but also with the relationships you've helped me form with Alberto and Oscar, the Jesuit, who's at kind of the organizing role of Red Comparte. And part of the trust you're building through trusted networks with Santa Clara University and Ibero and Jesuit universities in different places to build that trust. But
That's right.
you're open to so many others that are inspired by the Francesco vision, inspired by Laudato Si, to kind of implement our desire for encounter, desire for conversion through the relationships with folks. Do you want to just speak to this last image here? And then I think your title of your thesis was Reasons for Hope. And maybe just end with a story about one of the reasons for hope that you're most, moved by recently.
Sure. So this is a Mayan altar, right? This is in the Mayan worldview, it's centered around corn. They're the people of the maize, right? Of the corn, the Mayan civilization. And so their worldview is centered around the 4 different colors that corn kind of naturally exists in. And then that's connected to the 4 elements of the universe, the 4 cardinal directions, and so on. And so when you are going to be in touch with the sacred, you're very much in touch with the land, with nature, with our food, right? And therefore, in some ways, with our economy, right? And so these things are not contradictory or anything like that. And neither is it contradictory to really value this Mayan spirituality, this traditional indigenous spirituality, and to be Catholic at the same time, to be Roman Catholic. And so you find the cross in the center, and you can't see it because you're facing it from the back, but there's also Our Lady of Guadalupe on that little picture frame by the cross, propped up there by the aloe vera plant. So this is where they might have mass, for example, down there in Chiapas, where I got to spend some time. And so it's really all centered around their deepest values, around their identity, their culture, in a way that's at the same time in communion with something much more universal, right? And so I guess that's why, even though what they're doing is very specific to Chiapas, with their culture, with their coffee, it gives me hope because, when I first got down there, I said, oh, I've got to figure out their business model and then figure out how I can replicate it in Haiti, right? Because I work in Haiti. But once I got down there, it was just so complex and so nuanced and so rooted in their particularity that I realized you can't just copy and paste it, right? However, there are these intuitions, there is this sort of style, there are these values, there's this way of proceeding, there's these insights about, the economy and as I said, on the one hand, engaging the market very, very assertively, you can say, and on the other hand, withdrawing from the market, and some things are not for sale, and then how do you articulate those in a creative way that creates these virtuous circles? So once I got to that level, deeper down, then it's just this fountain of hope, really, and then you see how they're working together, for example, with the people in Colombia who also do coffee. So in Mexico, they're very advanced on the commercial end of things, on the retail and setting up the coffee shops and branding and creating relationship with their customers. Whereas in Colombia, they're very, very strong on the agroecology, on the how do you grow coffee sustainably, under shade, but how do you, for example, when this coffee rust epidemic hit, this disease, how do you manage it without using all kinds of poisons, that would typically be used? So the Colombians were able to help the Mexicans on the agroecology side of the coffee production. And the Mexicans were able to help the Colombians set up their first coffee shop at a Jesuit university in Colombia. And so it's really beautiful to see how they're working together, and how, sometimes you look at the news, or so many reasons to be depressed or to be angry. But when you end up, just spending time with these people, and seeing what they're doing, it's really just beautiful, and just fills me with inspiration, with hope. And now we're trying to, we're in dialogue with them. We're not quite part of the Comparte Network yet in Haiti, but we're very, very much inspired by what they're doing, and in dialogue with them. And the same way, this is kind of having a ripple effect through all their other networks. Again, with universities, with all kinds of groups, corporations, businesses. That one of the first main clients was a restaurant chain owned out of Japan, who, but when they came to visit, the one of the guys from the board of this big corporation, he was in tears. He literally cried, and he felt this human, personal connection. And then after that, it was back to business, and they had to find the right price and the right, quality standards and things. But there was this level of connection, of trust, and I think that's the game changer, when you can connect on a human level. Anyway, sort of babbling there.
And I think I love the rootedness in place you attended to, and the instincts. And we can't copy and paste, but that begins to offer us some insight on where we go. And the Francesco Collaborative is about inviting, and the Economy of Francesco is about inviting that. And you want to tell the story of Alberto, who's leading this Accelerator program you mentioned. He was invited by the dicastery in the Vatican to kind of use this template, but he wanted to stay committed to where we're at now in the phase of development, but also to inspire others. And I think that's part of what inspires me to tell this story and to share this story as a particular example, but one that each of us can kind of follow in our own kind of context.
Sure. So Alberto Irezabal is from Mexico City, and he was studying at the Jesuit University, this Ibero University that I've mentioned. He's an industrial engineer. And while he was studying there, he came down to Chiapas as I don't know if it was a sort of a volunteer, immersion thing, or some sort of internship or whatever. But I think it was more like one of these things that they do at Jesuit universities, where you take them down to see something different, And he fell in love with the project, with the people, and ended up staying on, bringing his professional training to bear on building up this viable business. At that point, they were just starting with the coffee roasting plant, before even they had the coffee shop. So Alberto he became the CEO of this social biz. It's a mix between, it's got cooperatives at the producer level, and then kind of social businesses at other levels. And then it's got this, it's inspired by Mondragon, so it's really complex. But anyway, Alberto is somebody from, a very different part of Mexico than this community. And one of his stories that I love to repeat is, they had the strategic planning session for this business that sells $2 million worth of coffee every year. I mean, it's significant as a business. And when they do their strategic plan, the way they do it is they have a fast. They spend 24 hours inside the church, lighting candles and dancing and praying. And then every 4 hours, they'll get up and do one of these prayers and dances. And then they'll talk about one of the points on the agenda. And then they wait another 4 hours, and nobody's eating and nobody's sleeping. Wow. And he says, it was like 3 a.m, and he was hungry and he was tired. And he's like, this makes no sense. What are we doing here? I mean, we're talking about a strategic plan for a really complicated business that sells $2 million worth of coffee, and we haven't slept and we haven't eaten. Like, what's the point? But he says, around that, in the middle of the night, when he says, at that point, nobody had eaten, nobody had slept, everybody was hungry, everybody was tired. And that's when we're all the same. That's kind of the great equalizer. And that's when we can talk about these things that concern us all, right? And that's how they do their strategic plan in the Celtal community. So there's all these beautiful kind of intercultural lessons and just completely mind-blowing ways of doing business, you know, and management. But so this is a process that takes time, and this is a process that requires kind of a deep relationship. And yes, we want this to be less alternative. Yes, we want this to change the bigger structures, you know, because otherwise, you know, we're sinking, you know. But we can't rush that. And we can't do it with the same logic that the mainstream model would use to get to scale. It's got to be so in Celtal they say kun kun, which means slowly, slowly, right? And it's got to be gradual. It's got to be kind of this kind of organic growth. And so Alberto, as you are in the US, Alberto is very involved with the Francesco economy in Mexico and in Latin America. And he was invited to help set up a sort of a large investment fund at a kind of transnational level. And he said, you know, that's wonderful. We want to get there, but we're not there yet. Let's start with Latin America.
Yes.
You know, let's start with the region that we're most familiar with, where we really have strong relationships already, and then we'll take it from there. You know, and maybe other people will kind of not copy and paste, but do their own thing on the same vibe, and we can be in relationship with each other, right? Yeah. So I think that this is also evangelizing the church, maybe in kind of our ways of proceeding. And as you know, in this church, there's also a very interesting model of diaconate, where it's well, that's another story.
Yeah.
But there's a very interesting model of church that I think has a lot to offer to the universal church as well. Yeah.
Beautiful, Emilio. Thank you so much for sharing this story, for your witness, for your integration of your own, using your own hands with the earth, the company, the folks you're with in Haiti, but also giving us this example of the folks you've been with in Mexico. And I think the broader themes of different, you know, mentalities of social and solidarity economy that can view how we go about our investments, how we go about our lives, how we go about the time, the integration of spiritual practice, this indigenous spiritual practice you spoke about for strategic planning, discernment, and wisdom, and, you know, how we can be collectively held by the abundance of God and the earth. So thank you for all this, and
thank you, Felipe.
conversation. Ciao.
Ciao.